The most dangerous lie older men are told is not that youth is attractive, it is that youth is the only thing that is attractive. You have heard it in 100 subtle ways. In advertising that pairs beauty with smooth skin and speed, in conversations that treat men over 40 as if they are transitioning into background characters, in dating advice that quietly assumes your best years were 10 or 20 years ago. The message is simple and corrosive. Aging equals decline. Desire moves in one direction, forward without you. It feels true because there is evidence around you. You see younger men with sharper bodies and fewer responsibilities. You feel changes in your own energy, in your recovery time, in the way the mirror is less forgiving than it once was. Maybe you have experienced rejection that seemed to confirm your worst suspicions. Maybe a long marriage ended and you stepped back into a dating market that felt unfamiliar and colder than you expected. It is easy to draw a straight line from age to irrelevance, but that straight line is a distortion. What declines with age is not automatically desirability. What declines is novelty. And novelty is only one variable in attraction. It is loud, but it is not deep. Culture amplifies what is loud because it is easy to sell. Smooth skin is visible. Emotional steadiness is not. A six-pack can be photographed. A regulated nervous system cannot. So when you internalize the idea that you are fading, you are not responding to women. You are responding to messaging. Women do not wake up one morning and collectively decide that men over 40 are invisible. What they respond to is vitality, presence, confidence, and psychological safety. Sometimes youth signals those traits. Sometimes it only imitates them. The problem is not that youth is valued. The problem is that men assume age erases their ability to signal those same qualities in a more grounded way. Insecurity at this stage of life rarely comes from pure vanity. It comes from comparison. You measure yourself against a younger version of you, against younger men in your office, against cultural images curated by algorithms. And when you compare surface attributes, youth usually wins. But attraction is not scored on a single axis. A man in his 40s or 50s who is emotionally reactive, financially chaotic, or desperate for validation will feel older than his years. A man of the same age who is steady, self-contained, and purposeful often registers as solid rather than old. The difference is not chronological, it is psychological. The lie works because it simplifies a complex reality. It tells you there is nothing to understand. That time has already decided for you. And if that were true, there would be no reason to examine your presence, your posture in the world, or the signals you give off in conversation. So the real question is not whether aging reduces attraction in a straight line. It does not. The real question is this: if decline is not automatic, then what are women actually evaluating when they look at an older man? When a woman meets you, she is not conducting a beauty pageant in her head. She is scanning for patterns. Men are often told that women evaluate them the way men evaluate women, through immediate physical comparison. There is some truth to physical attraction, and pretending otherwise would be naive. But what women register first, especially past their 20s, is not surface symmetry. It is stability. Stability shows up in ways that are easy to miss if you are focused on appearance. It shows up in how you enter a room. Not loudly, not timidly, but comfortably. It shows up in whether your energy is settled or seeking approval. It shows up in whether your attention feels intentional or scattered. These are not abstract qualities. They are signals of nervous system regulation. An older man who is emotionally regulated reads as predictable in the best sense. His reactions are proportionate. He does not overcorrect. He does not try to impress every person in the room. Women register that, not consciously as a checklist, but as a felt sense of ease or tension in his presence. Decisiveness is another signal that often outweighs surface features. Not arrogance, not control, but the quiet ability to choose where to sit, what to order, when to speak. Indecision communicates fragility. It suggests a man who is overly dependent on external validation. Decisiveness, when calm, communicates internal reference. It suggests he has lived enough to know his preferences and is not apologetic about them. Then there is social proof, which has little to do with status displays and more to do with relational coherence. Does this man seem respected by others? Does he move through his environment like someone who belongs there? Women are highly attuned to social calibration because it speaks to long-term safety and compatibility. A man who is quietly integrated into his world often outperforms a more physically impressive man who seems socially erratic. This is where the belief that looks dominate at every age begins to collapse. In youth, looks can compensate for instability because the stakes feel lower and the horizon is shorter. As women mature, their pattern recognition sharpens. They have experienced charm without follow-through. They have experienced intensity without reliability. Over time, they begin to prioritize what holds. Attraction becomes less about fantasy and more about probability, not the fantasy of who a man could be, but the probability of who he will consistently be. Stability suggests continuity. Emotional volatility suggests risk. This does not mean charisma is irrelevant. It means charisma without steadiness feels adolescent. A charming older man who lacks grounding can feel performative. A steady man with moderate charm often feels rare. As women accumulate their own experiences of disappointment and growth, their nervous systems start to value what lowers anxiety rather than what spikes excitement. And that shift is where a deeper form of magnetism begins to matter more than surface appeal alone. There is a quality that rarely gets named, yet it is felt immediately. Emotional gravity. It is not dominance, it is not loud confidence, it is not the restless intensity that many younger men mistake for passion. Emotional gravity is the ability to remain steady without withdrawing, engaged without chasing, present without performing. And it is far more available to a man in his 40s, 50s, or 60s than he often realizes. You have lived long enough to understand consequences. You have seen enthusiasm turn into regret. You have watched urgency distort judgment. If you have paid attention to your own mistakes, you have likely learned to pause before reacting. That pause is not weakness, it is weight. It creates a sense of groundedness that younger men often cannot fake because they have not yet been forced to develop it. The culture still sells intensity as the gold standard of attraction. Grand gestures, emotional fireworks, high energy charm. But intensity is unstable by nature. It rises quickly and falls just as fast. For a woman who has experienced enough relational volatility, intensity can register as risk rather than romance. Emotional gravity communicates something different. It suggests that your emotions do not run you. It suggests that your interest is deliberate rather than impulsive. When you speak calmly in a tense moment, when you do not rush to fill silence, when you hold eye contact without strain, you project a form of psychological safety that is difficult to manufacture. This does not mean you become stoic to the point of detachment. Emotional gravity is not coldness. It is controlled warmth. It is knowing you can express feeling without losing composure. It is being able to disagree without escalating. It is allowing attraction to build without demanding immediate reassurance. Women past their 30s are often less captivated by adrenaline and more attuned to nervous system compatibility. They ask themselves often unconsciously how they feel around you. Do they feel pressured? Do they feel evaluated? Do they feel like they must perform youth or perfection? Or do they feel steady, seen, and unhurried? A man with emotional gravity slows the tempo of an interaction without dragging it down. He does not chase validation through rapid texting, over-explaining, or exaggerated compliments. He allows space. That space can feel unfamiliar at first in a culture driven by speed, but it also feels rare. The irony is that many older men try to compensate for age by increasing intensity. They speak louder, pursue harder, attempt to match the energy of younger competitors. In doing so, they abandon the very advantage that age has given them. Real magnetism at this stage of life is quieter. It is the ability to remain centered when others become reactive. And once that internal steadiness is established, it begins to show in subtle, observable ways that others measure without ever announcing it. When men hear the word tests, they often imagine strategy, manipulation, or games. That framing is too simplistic. What actually happens in most interactions is quieter and more instinctive. Women calibrate. Calibration is not a conscious checklist. It is pattern observation. It is watching how you respond when something does not go your way. It is noticing whether your tone shifts when challenged. It is feeling whether your confidence holds when there is mild disagreement or ambiguity. Attraction is not random. It may feel spontaneous, but it stabilizes through evaluation. A woman might initially notice your appearance or your voice, but what sustains her interest is whether your behavior remains coherent over time. Consistency becomes proof. For example, if she teases you lightly, she is not necessarily trying to undermine you. She is observing whether you become defensive. If she takes longer to respond to a message, she may simply be busy, but she will notice whether you spiral into neediness or remain composed. If she expresses a differing opinion, she is registering whether you can tolerate friction without turning it into conflict. These are not traps, they are measurements of emotional resilience. By midlife, most women have experienced charm that dissolved under pressure. They have seen confidence collapse into insecurity when challenged. So their nervous systems look for congruence. Does the calm you project at first contact remain when circumstances shift slightly? Or does it fracture? Boundaries are another silent evaluation. If you say you are unavailable on a certain evening, do you stand by it without over-explaining? If you express a preference, do you hold it without apology? A man who abandons his own boundaries at the first sign of potential disapproval signals fragility. A man who enforces them harshly signals rigidity. The calibration is for balance. This challenges the comforting belief that attraction is purely emotional chemistry. Chemistry opens the door. Stability keeps it open. Over time, women look less for sparks and more for structure. They may not articulate this directly, but they feel it. An older man who understands this does not interpret every shift in tone as rejection. He does not react to minor fluctuations as threats. He assumes steadiness as his baseline and allows patterns to reveal themselves without forcing outcomes. The irony is that the men who fail these calibrations are often the ones trying hardest to appear youthful. They overperform confidence, overpromise availability, overreact to small uncertainties. In trying to control perception, they expose instability. The man who consistently passes these unspoken evaluations is not performing at all. He is aligned, and that alignment begins to form an identity that does not depend on competing with younger men, but on embodying something they have not yet consolidated. At some point, every man faces a choice. He can define himself as aging, or he can define himself as anchored. Aging is a biological fact. Anchoring is an identity decision. When you see yourself primarily as aging, you measure against what is disappearing. You track energy levels, hairlines, recovery time. You compare your present to your past and quietly mourn the difference. That mindset makes you reactive. It keeps you competing in arenas designed for men who are still building raw momentum. Anchoring shifts the frame. It assumes consolidation rather than decline. By this stage of life, you have gathered experience, pattern recognition, and perspective. You have paid for your lessons. Some were expensive, some were humiliating, some changed you permanently. But they are assets if you integrate them instead of resenting them. Fear-based comparison keeps you scanning for younger rivals. Identity-based strength keeps you focused on coherence. A younger man may have more speed. He may have fewer responsibilities and a higher tolerance for chaos. But speed without direction eventually burns out. Chaos eventually exhausts the people around it. An anchored man does not rush to prove relevance. He embodies it. His schedule reflects priorities rather than impulses. His finances, while not necessarily extravagant, are intentional. His relationships are chosen rather than clung to. When he speaks, it is not to fill silence, but to add weight. This is not about superiority, it is about differentiation. Mature masculinity is not youth extended, it is youth refined. The sharp edges of insecurity are sanded down. The need to impress softens into the ability to observe. The hunger for validation transforms into selective investment. Women sense this shift, not because you announce it, but because your behavior becomes less reactive. You do not chase every opportunity. You do not panic at every delay. You do not inflate your stories to compete with someone else's highlight reel. That restraint signals internal stability. The belief that relevance depends on outperforming younger men keeps you trapped in a race that never ends. There will always be someone younger. There will always be someone with more surface advantages. But very few men cultivate depth. Anchoring means accepting that some doors close with time and understanding that others only open because of it. Your presence becomes more distilled. Your standards become clearer. Your attraction is no longer driven by ego but by alignment. When stability, emotional gravity, and quiet authority converge, they form something rare. Not loud, not flashy, but unmistakable. Mature masculinity at its best is not compensation for lost youth, it is the evolution of it.